All right. So this is asynchronous testing on a distributed team because for all of us, our desk chair doesn't roll far enough to get across the country to talk to our teammates. So how are we going to do testing in a world where we're distributed if we haven't already set up that system? Testing feels really risky to us. Testing is one of the things that we worry about because literally testing is breaking. If you run a test and it hasn't broken at some point, then do you really know if the test is testing the right things? I think this is the concept behind test-driven development, that we write a test that breaks unless the code passes, and then we write the code to pass the test. Like, most of us don't do that extremely rigorously, but it's still sort of something that's in our understanding of testing, is that there should be a breakage point. Testing is also breaking because we're introducing changes. We theoretically have a stable running state, and then all of a sudden, we're going to introduce something that may or may not work. And if it changes the running state to something other than running, then we're in trouble. And we're altering behavior. We know how something works now, and testing is not the way it actually is going to work in the future. So one of the things that we do to deal with the fact that we are anxious about testing is that we have a lot of process around it. We say, okay, here's what the test suite looks like. Here are the automatic tests. If we're lucky, we have a QA team that also runs a bunch of other tests to help figure out what's going on. And we have this approvals process, like you can't commit until you've passed these tests. You can't release until you've passed these tests. All of this process gives us more comfort with the fact that testing is breaking. But what if your changes, the changes that you make, those risky changes, were invisible? What if you weren't taking a risk when you tested because nothing was showing to the outside? This is why we're called LaunchDarkly, because we want people to be able to launch things into production without showing it to everyone. It's really, really important when we're talking about feature flags to understand that deployment is not launch, it's not release. Deployment is getting your code to the place it needs to be in production. Launching or release is the business value of letting other people see that. So when you separate those two concepts, you're going to have a much easier time understanding how it is that you can test something in production if it's not showing to anybody. So when we're doing testing, the first thing we do is test locally. We make sure that it, in the phrase of the joke, it runs on my machine. You want to make sure that it's doing the things that you expect it to do in a local, well-controlled environment. And then we do an integration test. We commit it, and we say, okay, in the process of committing this code, have I broken anybody else? Is all of the code working together in a way that seems holistically sound? Because if we don't have that automation, it's really easy for us to introduce a breaking change and not know where it is, because a lot of us are contributing to our code bases at the same time. So the solution is to be able to test very, very quietly on production, because production is so much weirder than any test environment you can come up with, because production involves users. And there are a lot of genius QA people out there, people who have just like the mindset for security and QA is almost exactly the same. And it's like, what happens if I hit that nail with a screwdriver? What happens if? Not like it should work if, but like I'm curious about whether or not I can order -1 beers in a bar. So QA can catch a lot of these things, but they're never going to catch the full weirdness of a production environment, especially in a software as a service world where we have a bunch of dependencies on other pieces of software, on other streams, on other providers. We have this microservice architecture that is just really impossible to replicate in a local system. So we're going to have to test it on production, but we don't want to do it in a way that's a breaking change for our users, in a way that's a breaking change for our systems. Testing isn't a point. It's not a single moment in time. Testing is a state. It is the state of being reasonably sure that your software is running and working as you predicted. If we stop thinking of testing as I ran the test and at that moment in time everything was working, and we think of the tests and the test suite as covering the state of something, as analyzing the ongoing health of something, then it's a lot easier to understand that testing can involve moving things in and out of production, because the state of production is being tested, not that one commit. Let's go back and say that again. Testing isn't a point in time. It's a state. It is knowing the health of your system. And even if we've committed something, we need to be able to say it's working sort of, or it's not working, or it's mostly working, or it's working perfectly. Those could all be true for the same piece of code, depending on the different conditions of the environment that it's in. Like when we tested this webcast, we tested it at night because that's when we had time, and we didn't have any problems with our bandwidth. Well, now everybody's online and we have this problem. So like we did test it, and at that moment it was fine. But now we've tested it again in production, and we've discovered that daytime hours have bandwidth constraints that we're going to have to pay attention to. This is an addition to our known state of the world. Feature flags create superposition in your code. I ran into the bedroom and told my wife this last night while she was trying to go to sleep, and she's just like, because I'm that kind of obnoxious person. But it's a really cool idea. When you look at quantum superposition, or when you even think about like the light particle versus wave experiment, what we're saying is something can be two divergent things at exactly the same moment, depending on how we look at them. We're doing this slit test. We're saying, like, depending on how you measure it, it's either a wave coming through the slit or it's a photon coming through the slit. It's so cool. So when you have feature flags, depending on whether you're in the group that is flagged to get the new change, or whether you're in the other group, you're getting a different result, even though the code is identical. All that's happening is it is evaluating your context and giving you a different result. So amazing. I love the idea of quantum superposition as a way to describe flags, because I've been saying for a while that a feature flag is sort of like Schrodinger's code. It's on and off at the same time. When you deploy feature flagged code, you're saying, I want the ability to change the state for people who are in this group or that group. It's really powerful for testing because you can use it to test like acceptance, you can use it to test throughput, you can use it to test soak times. Like sometimes you really just need something to run for a while to understand whether or not you've put a memory leak in. But you don't want to do that for everybody, and you can't really do it for yourself, because your own testing, even if you have some kind of load testing mechanism, is not going to detect that the same way that thousands of people running it on their systems is. So what does that mean for you? Well, feature flags give you the ability to test your code without disrupting. You want to be able to test things without messing with the user experience, certainly for the majority of people, but maybe not for anybody. It allows you to check otherwise unknowable facts. Like I said, you're not going to be able to replicate the weirdness of production in any kind of test environment. So you're going to have to be able to test in a way that answers things that you couldn't have known on any kind of normal system that you're used to using. So you're going to be able to check unknowable things more securely. You're still not going to be able to answer unknown unknowns entirely, but it gives you more of a head start on like, hey, something funny is happening here. Let's put some observability on that and ask questions that we didn't know to ask, which I think is really the key point of observability systems. Is a monitoring system allows you to get answers to questions you had. An observability system allows you to get questions to answers you didn't know you had. And finally, I want you to be able to orchestrate releases, not deployments. as developers, we frequently think of ourselves as people who are pushing code. And we are, but we also need to understand that code isn't the business value. Code helps provide the business value, but the business value of what we're building is actually the ability for people to do things. There's this great book by Kathy Sierra called Badass, Making Users Awesome. And she said this thing that resonates with me so much. She said, nobody wants to use an ATM. We want money. We want cash. The interface is just something that we have to deal with in order to accomplish what we want. And I think that's true of most software. Nobody sits down and says, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to use Word today. That's going to be fun. No, we want to write a document. We need to get some work done. So when you remember that release is about the business value, is about the ability to get work done, it's easier to understand that testing your deployment is key, but it's not actually where the value is delivered. And again, separating deployment and release is going to give you a lot more insight into that. Okay, so I've hypothesized for a while, and now we are going to get real. What could you do with flags for testing? You can test load with progressive delivery. So if you've ever been near a database, you know that database queries are hard, and it is easy to be subtly wrong in a way that's going to cause a ton of churn and traffic and database bog down, but only at scale. And you're not going to be able to tell if you've screwed that up until you've had it out at scale for a while. So if you feature flagged this new query, what you're going to be able to do is turn it off if it's causing a big problem, but also maybe you could deploy it to only 5 or 10% and do an analysis on whether the amount of load increase is something that you can sustain over a full rollout. It gives you a chance to predict whether you can handle that kind of load or whether you're going to need to do some elastic scaling. You also want to let new features soak. It gives you better data about how they're being adopted and unexpected side effects and things that you can't anticipate until it gets out in the real world. But if you're doing progressive delivery, it gives you a chance to understand, oh, at 10%, we started having some weird spikes. Let's look at that and see if it's something we can fix. And I love this. This is sort of the anti-DevOps. Developers can throw something over the wall to product and say, release it when you're ready. We're done with it. We feel confident. It's been tested. You can handle it from here. You can turn it on yourselves. We don't need to have tickets come back to us that say, will you please turn on the thing? If you have feature flags, you can hand off all of that release stuff to your product or marketing or whoever is in charge of that and not have to circle back to it. All right, here's another example. What if you want to test around the world? So you're all sitting in your home offices, maybe with small children climbing on you. Synchronicity is hard. It's hard to say, okay, at noon Eastern, we're all going to do the thing that we need to do for release. Like, why would we need to do that? If you have committed your part and done your testing, then you can say, okay, my part is ready to go. I've flagged my thing ready to go, but it's not going to go live until we get the approvals process from somebody else who says, okay, all of the things are ready to go. Now we're going to turn on the leader flag that says, roll out the whole thing. Consensus about whether something passes testing can be asynchronous. Like, there is this huge problem right now where not only are we working from home, a lot of us are working from home with other commitments. And maybe 2 p.m. is a really bad time for you because it's kiddo nap time. And if you're on the phone, the kid wakes up and then there's just disaster and screaming. So what if you could do this without having some kind of verbal coordination or even like time synchrony? We don't need that for testing. We're used to having it, but we don't really need it. It's not a thing that we must do together. And finally, one of the things that I really like is the ability to hook your your flag API into your monitoring and say, look, if there's a 1,000% spike, I want you to turn off that inbound feed stream. Like your database is consuming data from a third party, and all of a sudden there's a huge spike. Well, your option is either to consume that huge spike and overwhelm your database and probably degrade performance for your other customers, or say, something is wrong over here and I'm not talking to you until you figure it out. That gives you a lot more ability to protect your whole customer base from the rogue actions of somebody's third-party thing. It's not necessarily malicious. I think all of us are dealing with, why is there this sudden traffic spike? Because it turns out that our backbone is not really built to have quite this much traffic on it. So if we build in automated responses that can turn things off or turn them down immediately without requiring a human response, then we're giving ourselves a lot more leeway around how to make sure that things continue to work for everybody. So that is my presentation. I'm super excited to take requests. We have a URL that if you follow this, you will fill in a form and get a t-shirt. I'm not going to guarantee they're going out immediately, but I promise we will keep track of them. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Heidi. Just check. Can you hear me all right? Heidi, you hearing me? Hearing me? Excellent. Thank you so much. There were so many fascinating points raised in that. I mean, given that both of us work at LaunchDarkly, we're used to different aspects of learning about testing in production, learning about the different uses of flags. Having said that, I had never thought of the superposition, the quantum superposition idea before. It's Schrodinger's server, or Schrodinger's site reliability engineer. I can just imagine. I mean, you know, keeping SREs locked in boxes with bottles of poison is, I think, what a large number of companies are basically currently doing. So
I'm a little worried that's how it's working. Yeah. It's so being able to add certainty helps massively here. The point about that lack of point testing isn't a point, it's a state, is something particularly, it's very easy to fall into that mindset of thinking that, you know, we did testing here, right? Mm-hmm. And it was okay. Yeah, like it's tested, it's great. I'm like, well, yeah, I ate lunch, but I still need dinner. It's a continuous process.
Right. And it's amazing how things that seem to have been tested and were fine are, you know, can suddenly go south despite no deployments having happened, no configuration changes having happened. There's, I think there's a degree to which when you are taught computing and engineering, you are raised thinking that, you know, everything is nicely deterministic. Everything, you know, works the way it says it should. And then
that's why we have ops people. They know better.
They have learned the hard way. They are the embittered, snorting with laughter types who are ready to jump into action at any moment. So yeah, watching things deteriorate almost in a kind of organic or biological way is common practice. So having to deal with that, what have you seen anything from how that changes QA practice in terms of thinking about it that way?
Well, I think one of the interesting things that has happened over my career is that we have fewer QA teams because we have more emphasis on developers doing their own testing and more emphasis on test suites, all of which are necessary but not sufficient. We really do need that breaker-attacker mindset. And as for like the weird entropy that code that should be stable experiences, I think a lot of that has to do with developers really visualize clean inputs. I've been saying for a couple years that we need to be preparing Unicode for all of our inputs because emoji named children are coming. And it turns out that there is an emoji named company out there now. And
Really?
yeah, like they
I've
have a
missed that
literal
one.
Unicode. I'll have to go look it up. But yes, so like, is your system going to break if the fashion or style of inputs changes? And have you bounded your input sufficiently to prevent that? I think that's a really common break point for
Yeah.
people.
There's having the testing the edge cases is great. There was always remember the a colleague of mine always used to use. There's a Unicode symbol, heavy black heart, which apparently somehow is a great tester for any text pipeline you have or any data pipeline. Somehow it manages to touch all the edges. And so he'd use it whenever testing any kind of Unicode pipeline, because if there was a bug in there, heavy black heart would find it.
That's good to know.
Yeah, there's this is there some great tools out there for doing this, especially for kind of fuzz testing or property testing. There was a great talk at PyTennessee, which I was at a month ago, about Hypothesis, which is a Python library, and there are equivalents of this that will understand what types you are testing with, and then deliberately push at all the edges of those types. But that again is it's great for unit testing, which is when you're testing very tightly defined bits of code that are running very nice and neatly inside one process. For testing, very large multi-system integrated pipelines, that's where you end up. There's nothing out there that really tests in that way that I've seen. So being able to react quickly and being ready to do that actual testing yourself, and being able to wall that off is incredibly useful. The superposition aspect is actually something we get a lot of questions about as well, isn't it? It's something people worry about. How do you test for all the different combinations of flags that you could get? What
So I have
questions or what advice, given that?
Yeah, I have a partial answer to that. It's not a full answer, but what I've been saying is test your current state, because if you don't test your known state, you don't know if the new thing is what's breaking. Test with all your flags on. Test with all your flags off. These things may break, but they should break in a predictable way. And then test the delta. Like, if everything is stable state except this one flag, test that. It doesn't cover all of the combinatoric possibilities, but it covers enough of them to give you a sort of mathematical head start. And then if it turns out you're having a behavioral problem after that, you always have the ability to turn the flag off really fast.
Yeah, that's incredibly handy as well. Being able to flip things immediately when you notice there's a problem is super useful. So that's an interesting one. Testing with everything on and everything off is, I can imagine, it's kind of quite scary.
Oh, it's terrible.
Well.
And like I said, it frequently breaks, but your broken state should still be predictable. Like, you should know what kind of broken it looks like. So, for example, LinkedIn had this problem a few years ago. Something happened in their flag management system such that all of their flags were on simultaneously. Like the ones that say, hey, register for pro, and the ones that say, hey, thank you for registering for pro at the same time. And it was really bad. They had to roll back a long way because they didn't have a good state. Like, they didn't.
Right.
Yeah. Because it was not actually feature flags. It was more like variables.
Right.
Right. But while it was broken, it was still serving a page. Like, it wasn't the user experience that you wanted, but you could see what was happening. And so, like, I'm not saying expose that to the world. You don't want to do that. But I am saying testing them all on and all off tells you exactly where the delta is. And the thing I've been saying, like the delta in the physics sense, the change from baseline. The thing that I've been saying about testing and flags is it's really hard to lose $1,000 at penny slots. If your bet is very small, your odds of losing a lot of money are very small.
Right.
It's not hard to lose $1,000 at like $100 slots. I don't even know if those exist, but you could absolutely lose $1,000 at that because you're making bigger bets. So the smaller and more incremental the bet you're making with each feature flag, the less likely it is to be catastrophic. You lost a penny.
And this is the aspect about keeping blast radius small, really, isn't it? Once you know that the cost of a bug is substantially reduced, then you feel freer to be risky about it in ways that are actually end up being fine. And being able to do that flag flipping on and off is incredibly scary, but at the same time, you're in control, right? You're watching the results live. And so you can fix it immediately if it's a problem. We actually had an interesting question here, which is we had a few different questions coming up in the chat, and also thank you very much for everybody who's joined us so far. Well, actually, let's start at the top. From Zena, we had an advice, which is what's the top piece of advice for staying productive during this time of forced working from home?
What's my top piece of advice for staying productive for working from home? First of all, your value as a human is not related to your productivity. And I think we need to say that really clearly. Your value as a human is not about productivity. That said, I think all of us feel better if we're doing something useful, and a useful thing that we can do is keep working. So I think it's really useful for us to be productive, to remember that we had all these rituals for going to work and for being at work. So one of the things that I do and have done for a long time, because I work from home anyway, is I have a commute. In the summer, when it's not quite as wintry in Minnesota, I sometimes go for a bike ride before work. And in the evening, I go and I sit on my couch downstairs without talking to anybody after work for half an hour so that I can change gears from work to home and come upstairs sort of free of all of the work stuff. I think whatever rituals you need to be productive are important to preserve, even if they feel slightly ridiculous when you're not leaving the house. We have a sales guy who is ironing his shirts and tying his neckties for webinars, and I'm like, good for you. If that's what it takes for you to feel productive, you should absolutely do it. If what it takes for you to feel productive is working a split shift, where you work, 4 hours in the morning and then you swap with your spouse to do childcare, and then you come in and do a few hours at night, that's okay. It is whatever you need to get through this.
Yeah. There's, I think, one of the most useful refrains that I've continually heard during this is that self-kindness is important, right? Nobody is working at 100% capacity right now. And it's learning that it's okay to make mistakes, because everybody's making mistakes as we do this. Everybody is winging it. You are not the only one. And it's, we are being more tolerant of each other, dealing with this, because we know we're all dealing with this ourselves.
Yes.
And so working to find, trying things out is a great idea, because you're not sure of the best way to do it. It's, part of, the agile concept of continual rapid iteration and learning what works and what doesn't and tweaking as you go. Thank you for that. Yeah.
So what's our next question?
So we have somebody who's Gare Fordes says, I think as engineers, we might struggle how to identify what all is a feature flag and how to write code using feature flag so the code does not become too complex. Any ideas, advice about that? Any ideas about how to write code using flags so that it doesn't become too complicated?
All right. This is actually a really key question, and I'm glad you asked. It's important to understand that there are two main types of flags. There are semi-permanent flags, which I sort of think of as the ops and sales flags. Those are things like entitlements that turn on and off access, and you want those to stay around permanently. And then there are temporary ephemeral flags that are going to go in your code only as long as you need them so that you can do this deployment and the testing, and then you're going to remove them because you don't want to leave a ton of flags sitting in your code. That's a threat surface, not necessarily in a security sense, but in an accident sense. It's sort of like leaving Legos all over your floor. Like, yeah, we want to take out the Legos and play with them, but also we want to pick them up because there are a few things worse than stepping on a Lego in the middle of the night. In the same way, you want to pull those temporary flags back out of your code and set up a hygiene cadence to do that. Otherwise, yeah, then your code does become too complicated.
Yeah.
I do think that feature flags are sort of a clarifying force for what a feature is. Like, this is a discussion a team has to have together. Like, what is the size of a feature? Well, frequently a feature has elements that a lot of different teams or people work on. So maybe there's, again, like this leader flag that dictates like the feature as it appears to users. So if you add check scanning to your banking app, well, you need image recognition and you need, camera use, and you need a whole bunch of different things. Each of those would be a sub feature that had its own flag for testing. And then they would roll up to this leader flag that would be the feature. So as a team, when you're designing your software with feature flags, you're going to think about what is a testable unit, a minimum viable unit to flag.
Right. It's great. It's interesting to think about it in that way. I hadn't really thought about it in terms of that one of the uses of flags. It's fascinating to see in engineering the byproducts of practices. You know, that sometimes the byproduct of the practice is just as useful as the main benefit. And so in this case, using flags to define the seams, right, of where a feature is and where the sub features are, is a useful practice.
It's a very
in itself. It
like sort of in a throwback way. It's very object oriented. Like, what is the object that I'm flagging?
Right. And there's something else with flags. I think part of the advice that we give is with a flag, try and have the flag do the smallest possible thing, and name and describe the flag in terms of that thing.
Smallest useful thing.
Useful, exactly.
Not just like you could have a lot of flags that control unuseful things that are like, does this variable or not? Whatever the useful unit of work is. And that's a team by team thing. Like, we know teams who flag really enormous things and manage fine that way. And we also know teams who are like, maybe this, 1 day of work for one developer goes under a flag. It depends on your team dynamics. Right. And the other thing about finding the seams is that it's really useful when you're doing decomposition of a monolith, because what you do is you flag the whole monolith and then you create replacements for the microservice that is replacing a part of the monolith. And as you have replaced it, you can turn down the monolith and make sure that your replacement microservice is actually taking the load that you expect it to. Yeah. So you can identify exactly which part of the monolith you're breaking out and replace it using a flag without having to do an abrupt cutover. You can sort of do a leveling. And
there's, especially with percentage rollouts, there's something, and I think this has been a topic for both of us with the user context that you provide for a flag. We tend to think of it as users, but it doesn't have to be a user. It can be a server.
It can be a server. It can be an endpoint.
It can be, right.
Yeah.
So some percentage of anything that you want to gradually increment and see it take the load, and validate that it's working. Yeah, that's fantastically useful. Let's see what else. So just to round off, the using flags to write code and avoiding complexity of code. What we've got is, describing the code in terms of flags. And then we've got making sure that you have good hygiene around flags, cleaning up regularly, especially, temporary flags for rolling out features. We've got making sure that flags do the smallest useful thing. There's something that we talk about a lot when teaching with one of the demos we have about dark mode, right? Dark mode in an app. If you want to add a new setting that enables dark mode in an app, the flag doesn't have to be wrapped around the whole dark mode code. It can just be wrapped around the bit of the UI that makes the dark mode checkbox appear or menu item appear, which will turn it on and off for everybody without actually changing the main logic. Let's see what other questions we have here. We've got, we talked about, we have Ellie asking about advice for helping us iterate on new work from home processes that we're figuring out. Is this something, I suppose, we talked already about trying to identify useful work from home practices that many of us are getting used to. You've been doing it the whole time so far. Some of us, I definitely much prefer working in an office because it provides that neat change in environment, going into work mode, going out of work mode. And as you were saying, having some way of making that change happen at home is useful. How about, have you seen anything around how to do this with teams? So as teams transition into work from home mode and try to come up with better practices, have you seen any interesting things there about trying to make that migration for a team?
So we use a tool called GeekBot, which I find super useful. It asks us for essentially our stand-up status, including, and this is really cool, how do you feel today? Answer with an emoji or GIF, which gives us this sort of sense of where everybody is in a feeling like, if I see that somebody has posted just a facepalm GIF, I know that they're already having a rough morning, and I'm going to take it a little easier on them. If I see that somebody has posted a bicycle GIF, I can ask them if they got to go out on a ride today. So it gives us this little team bonding moment, but it's also completely asynchronous. It's not like GeekBot happens at the same time for all of us, because I have mine set to a different, like mine asks me at the same time in the morning, but I'm in a different time zone than most of my team. So I can just see these team check-ins roll in without us all having to be on the phone at the same time. I think that there's a lot of asynchronous stuff that has been percolating around that we haven't really needed. And I think one of the great resources to look to is the open source community, because by definition, almost all of them are working remotely from each other and still trying to figure out how to coordinate. And so when we're looking for advice on that, like go talk to, go see what OSI has, go see what your favorite open source developer does for their side project, because you're going to get a lot of insight on how they can accomplish really impressive things without being physically co-located. I think as far as iterating on it and understanding what's happening, it's not really a bullet journal, it's kind of a bullet journal. I just have a list of things that I have done in my day that helps me sort of calculate how productive a day has been. And then if I'm really on the ball, I write in if I did something new. Like, did I set up my meds so I remember to take them? Did I go for a walk before work? So I can sort of correlate that. I use a tool called Rescue Time. I installed it in 2016.
Yep.
And it locks me out of Twitter for the first half hour of my day. And it monitors, it turns out existential dread is bad for my productivity. Like I can't,
you don't say.
I can't with news in the morning. Like this is actually a really important thing for me, is I can't read news in the morning because I just get so anxious about everything that's going on. I can't work. And so my morning routine does not have any like news or outside information in it.
That's
The
great,
other
because my
thing
morning
that,
routine at the moment is just kind of look at Twitter and then curl back under the duvet for another 3 hours.
right, yeah,
Um,
exactly. Um, the other thing Rescue Time does for me is it prompts me to, so like it's tracking where I'm spending time in my apps, and then it prompts me to say what I was doing. So like
ooh,
you spent a bunch of time in Google Slides, well, like now I can say, okay, I was writing this talk. And I can go back and look at that historical data. It's really nice.
that's great. I need to try that again. I did try Rescue Time like a decade ago or so, and the problem, and I think this is something, I know that you've spoken a lot about ADHD, and I have similar battles with it. It is so hard to build and maintain these kinds of habits, and especially to keep track of what you've actually been doing, even when it turns out that you've actually been quite productive, but you forget that. And so, unfortunately, you end up beating yourself up despite the fact that you've
Right.
stayed on focus.
So we have a team Trello board where we put all of our projects like a Kanban board. This is what I'm doing. But we've taken to adding a mini tasks checklist of all of the requests that we've gotten and fulfilled. Um, and that's been super useful for me because it turns out that at least the last couple weeks, when people are on lockdown, we've been really reaching out and needing human connection. And I've been spending so much more time in meetings and socials than I would at other times. And so it's been really useful for me to say, okay, I only got so far on these projects, but I also did these 10 pop up things that came up. And that's where my time has been going. And
Mm,
it's a thing to look at, and it's a thing to say, like, we're all figuring this out. Like, how much meetings is too much meetings? Um,
yeah.
is pairing a better option? Is total silence a better option? Everybody works differently. Um,
Mm,
it was just easier to self-regulate in an office.
yeah. Yeah. And it's particularly what you said, the point about meetings is the initial reaction, or when the whole working from home and self-isolating started, that meetings disappeared for a while, and now they're back,
It's kind of
and
great.
yeah, and now they're back kind of with a vengeance, as
Mm-hmm.
it were. And we're having fun, using Snap Camera and all kinds of things to be pineapples or potatoes. But it's there's still an awful lot of time, a lot of the workday being broken up
Mm-hmm.
in that way that can disrupt productivity.
So I
Um,
think for a team, maybe you say, like, we have a no meetings Wednesday at LaunchDarkly, but I think maybe
mm,
for your team, you could say, we're not going to have any team meetings in the morning. Block your time. You're having a meeting with you so that you can get some focus work done.
right, and this is actually, we have a question about that at the moment. As someone who procrastinates a lot, what do you think is a good structure for using your time to program? And I think, well, the first one that you just mentioned is to do with blocking your time off in advance,
Mm-hmm.
to specifically plan blocks of time around that. Any other advice on that?
Accountability buddies.
Oh
And
yeah.
that doesn't have to be somebody that you work with. Like maybe
Hmm.
you have a friend who you know is also struggling, and you're like, okay, we're like, I do this with writing all the time because I love writing, but it's hard to get into. So I'm like, okay, we're gonna do a 1 hour writing sprint, and if I see you online, then I'm online too, and we should both yell at each other. But like, uh, having that feeling that you're both working on this together and you're going to report back to each other about how that's working. The other thing, like procrastination, is such a huge problem for me. And the worst part is productive procrastination. Like, I am capable of doing so much useful work that is not the work I need to be
Hmm.
doing. Um,
Oh God. Yeah.
it's not like I'm, goofing off, but I'm not doing like the one thing that I really need to be doing. And what's useful to me in that moment is for somebody to explain to me why the one thing I'm supposed to be doing is crucial right now. Like, what is
Right.
the long-term implication of doing this? Because uh, I don't respond well to, well, because there's a deadline. I do
Yes.
respond well to, well, I mean, I respond to deadlines somewhat, but only if they're backed by like, or you fail. Um, what I do better at is like, if you get this out, here's the benefit to actual humans as
Yes.
opposed to the company.
Yes. That's and incentives. Unfortunately, we get used to incentivizing by punishment rather than by reward. But
Mm-hmm.
I think for you and I, this is something I have a lot of problems remembering. Is trying to focus on the benefits of whatever it is that we're currently avoiding,
I
and
also,
how. Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Uh, No, exactly. It's remembering that hey, that thing that we want to get done, people might really like it, that or that it'll be so good when we finally got that sorted and it's not weighing on our mind anymore.
I use a lot of micro rewards. I literally have like a family budget for M&Ms next to my desk, and I get an
Right.
M&M when I finish a paragraph, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yes, I am the most reluctant like dog trainer ever. Um,
Skinner box your way to productivity.
exactly, because it turns out that we like dopamine, and
Mm.
we will do almost anything to get that consistent feeling of accomplishment. So if when you're coding, like, so there are two different problems with like how do you do that. One of them is there's a hump to getting started, and this exists for everybody, but it's worse for people with ADHD. Is
Oh yeah.
like task switching into something that takes work is hard. Like I don't like Markdown, and yet I need to be writing in Markdown. Uh,
Right.
and so every time I open Markdown and I'm like, I hate this and it's not HTML and I hate everything. Um, what I do is like, I'm like, oh wait, maybe I'll go do something else, anything other than look at this Markdown.
Right.
Right. So the thing that I did was I wrote it in Google Docs, and then I've lowered the entry from write a thing and learn Markdown simultaneously to I've written a thing and now I'm just translating it to Markdown. And
Right.
lowering that threshold to switch into a task is really important for me. So
That's a great
once
idea.
once I get into a task, it's fine, but sometimes I have to break it down into like depending on how averse I am to doing this task, I have to break it down into like, yay, I opened the window.
Right.
Reward for me. I
Mm-hmm.
opened the like literally I opened the window. Okay, I'm going to tell my friend that my accountability buddy that I opened the window. She opened the window too. Okay. Next step. Write a sentence.
Yep.
And
Yep.
once you get going, the momentum is there. It's just switching into it is really hard. And I think it's especially important for us to understand that in this time of pandemic and crisis, our cognitive load is already up to here.
Oh
Like
God,
we
yeah.
are already churning on what if I get sick? What if my parents get sick? Like, do I have enough rice? Right? All of that is taking up brain space we used to have for, I wonder how that code is going to work. And
Mm.
so everything that we can do to minimize cognitive load is going to help us be more productive. And that includes not task switching. Like there's a bunch of
Right.
studies and like I'm such an inveterate task switcher.
Same
Um,
here.
yeah, because like anytime I hit a block of any kind of difficulty, I'm like, I'll just go do something else. Um, some people, it turns out, have oh, that's hard. I want to dig into it. I want some of that.
Right.
Uh, it's
And
not me.
and the thing is, I remember used to be like that. I remember it's interesting, watching my son now, who has recently, who has been, similarly, dealing with ADHD, and now been digging into creating his own games and doing all kinds of amazing things.
Mhm.
And I see him just, go down and focus. He suddenly gets interested. I'm gonna, um, you know, uh, work out how collision detection works in Unreal Engine or something,
Mhm.
and dive into it for 2 hours solid,
Mhm.
and come out with a new bit of his game, which
Mhm.
is kind of amazing. And yet now, I think with the added stress of everything happening, and we fall into this natural state of having 100 windows open, and certainly more enough tabs to break Chrome open in our browsers, and with distractions flying at us every 5 minutes, um, being able to turn those off for long enough that you can actually focus.
Yeah, it turns out that in order to get into something, you have to be bored. And
Yes.
And it's really hard. So when you're thinking about structuring your day to be more productive, when you have very little cognitive resource left, you need to avoid task switching. You need to not have your day broken up by meetings. You need to be able to just open the one thing you need to be doing and get bored enough to do it. At least for me.
Yeah. Being able to take the emotions like boredom and other things that normally are so painful and use that pain for good.
Mm-hmm.
Let the boredom flow through you.
Yeah, exactly.
We've only got 5 minutes left. We have one more question that I'm going to go to, which is from Gerford. This is returning to the topic of feature flags.
Mm-hmm.
This is about just a couple minutes on what you were saying about leader flags. She was. We have. You are saying it is sometimes useful to wrap smaller flags in a lead feature flag. Any good examples of lead flags? Leader flags.
So this is the one LaunchDarkly loves to talk about. You may remember that several years ago, Atlassian rebranded everything that they do. Like the Jira, the Confluence, everything got a new icon, got new CSS, like it all looked different. And that happened when the CEO flipped a feature flag on stage. Instantly, all over the world, everybody had the new branding.
That was amazing, yeah.
That was LaunchDarkly behind the scenes, because what had been happening is all of the different teams responsible for the rebrand across Atlassian had worked on their special part. Like, here's the CSS, here's the logo, here's the different font, here's, all of the different parts of this rebranding. And they had already deployed the new material. So nothing had to be loaded. All of those were behind individual feature flags that could be turned on and off for testing. It wasn't like the whole rebrand was under this monolithic flag. They all had individual flags.
Right.
And then the individual flags fed up into this leader flag that was a simple Boolean on-off that says, show new branding. And in the moment that flipped, we do, like LaunchDarkly does, a push architecture. So we pushed to all of the clients everywhere this new instruction to say, use the new stuff instead of the old stuff. But because the resources were already there, nobody had to reload anything. So instantly, you get this new version. And it was so magical. Like, it's super cool.
It's great. So how do you actually, how do you do that in practice? How do you use LaunchDarkly dashboard to set that up?
So in practice, what you do is you create a dependency. So in the LaunchDarkly dashboard, before you hit to the rules, there's a thing that's called prerequisites. Dependencies?
Right.
Something. I've written it both ways.
I think it's prerequisites at the top of the targeting.
Prerequisites.
Yeah.
And you say, this flag depends on leader flag. And if leader flag is off in this environment, it won't show.
Right.
But of course, you can have different environments. So you can have leader flag on in test and test that everything is going to go right, and still have leader flag off in production. So it gives you two levels of control. You're never going to see anything in production until leader flag is on. But in test, you might turn leader flag on and have 5 of 10 elements on, because that's all that's ready. And then if there's a problem, you can turn it off and fix it and turn it back on and be able to see it all in test as it's going to look in production. And it's all the same code. You're not having any code divergence.
Right.
It's just what's being shown due to the user context.
All due to the flag setup. That's fantastic. So being able to just have a whole bunch of these flags dependent on this one flag, so you've only got one flag to flip when it comes to turning everything on and off.
Yep.
Makes it much simpler, especially in an emergency.
There's also a great way to use prerequisites to say only people with like version 1.2 and above get this feature, because it breaks things otherwise. Like prerequisites give you a lot of power to say if and only if.
Right. And so you can end up doing some quite powerful logic there, and it's a nice way to modularize that logic. You have the complex rules around versioning in one flag, and then have the other flags that use that keep the logic in that one flag rather than needing to re-implement it themselves. Brilliant, thank you. I think we're coming to time. It's now 11 a.m. Hello, thank you. Sorry about that. Fortunately, lost the home connection at the end. Just saying, thank you so much again for your talk and for answering questions. We have had many speakers over the years at the Test and Production event in San Francisco and New York and London.
And Berlin.
And Berlin, thank you. We are eager to bring some of those people back to talk, but we are more eager to have new speakers who have never spoken at a test in production before. If you think you might be one of those people, please do let us know. Give me or Heidi a yell, or the LaunchDarkly account at LaunchDarkly on Twitter. We would love to help you present your talks about testing and production, about site reliability, about feature flagging, QA, circuit breakers, what other kind of topics? Any of those. And certainly the topic about how teams work together remotely, in sync, or asynchronously during working from home and self-isolation. I think we're all learning lots of new things there, even those of us who have been working from home continually up till now. So yes, please let us know. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back next week on Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Yes.
And if you have any other questions, you can go ahead and tweet to us at the Test and Production hashtag, or just at LaunchDarkly, and we'll get around to answering them.
Yes, please do. Any other questions that we weren't able to cover in this talk, just at us directly. You can see our Twitter handles there, or at LaunchDarkly, and we'll be very happy to get back to you. Thank you very much, and see you next week. Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you.
Goodbye.